I am Tyler Fonro, and I am the Recreational Trails Manager for Salt Lake City Public Lands in the Trails and Natural Lands Division. Feel free, if you would like to join us at the table and not have so much coming between us, you have more than welcome to do that. We have our online viewers as well. The way this presentation is set up today is that I will be sharing a lot of information, a lot of dense information that we have received from SE Group, who is the professional consultant in charge of our evaluation. Because they are an out-of-town consultant and their two field experts are literally in the field and will be coming into to our meeting virtually from their phones, I believe, I will be presenting the information that they shared with us. So I will do and I just mentioned this at the peanut board meeting 2 weeks ago. You're taught not to do is read slides on a PowerPoint, but it is not my data. It is their information that they would like to share. If there's an opportunity for me to editorialize a little bit, that's appropriate. I will, just to give something context. Also, because there's so much dense information. There's so much dense information. Unless it's a quick clarifying question that will help you understand the rest of the presentation, that you can ask it. Otherwise, just take a note on your phone or a piece of paper and pencil, and we'll have Q&A for the last 30 minutes. So we've got a full hour budgeted. The presentation is about 25 minutes of me talking, and so hopefully we'll have plenty of time to talk at the end. Scott and Jeremy are they're actually in a building, so they are going to be able to present and hopefully hear us well. So they are consultant experts and be able to answer questions about context or technical questions. So I'm going to admit that person.
And you can meet those, and then I can cover you, so you can
love it. And so I find Leah's name, and I make you a host. Make co-host. Yes, thank you, Leah. Look how quickly I learned to Zoom. All right. So let's get moving. So here's the Foothills Plan Evaluation, Phase 1 Review, and Future Recommendations. I just click it. There we go. So our evaluation project team. There have been 3 professional consultants that have been helping us through this evaluation process. SWCA is an environmental consultant that was brought in 2022 or 2021 through 2023. And they conducted a baseline environmental and cultural report. We presented that information. They did. We co-hosted that here in May of last year. They overlapped with the SE Group, as did our communications consultant, for about 4 to 6 months, so that we were working in collaboration and we could give a more holistic evaluation approach. SE Group is a national consultation, ecological restoration, recreation planning group. Annika Egan was their project manager from the beginning through summer of 23, where the evaluation was complete. From that point, she left the organization, and Brad Potter came in to actually help facilitate the report and get that all in a readable document, which can be very challenging with all that dense information. But the evaluation was complete, and we did a presentation in June of 23 showing the preliminary findings from that evaluation, where Scott and Jeremy presented as well. One of the principals at SE Group, Mark Kane, has been the director, and he's their director of community planning. He's been on point supervising this project along the way. As I mentioned, and I pointed out to Scott and Jeremy, they've been our on-the-ground technical experts. Scott is the principal for Kalen Enterprises, a restoration and recreation planning firm, and Jeremy Wimpey, PhD, is Applied Trails Research, which has an expertise in geospatial analysis and recreational and natural service trail planning. So tonight, the presentation objectives are to share the key findings from SE Group's 2 evaluations. First, they evaluated the actual plan itself. So the 2020 Foothills Trail System Plan that was adopted in 2020. So they evaluated that plan and gave us feedback for its strengths and areas of improvement. And then secondly, did the same thing with the actual Phase 1 implementation of that plan itself. So those will be 2 separate findings for their evaluation. They also took those 2 evaluations to share future recommendations and recommended next steps. So that will be part of our presentation as well. And lastly, not speaking for SE Group, but speaking for Salt Lake City Public Lands, we're going to be sharing some concurrent efforts that Public Lands has undertaken since we've been in this evaluation process to keep the protection and the environment at the forefront. The process review, this of SE Group. So they began in the fall of 2022 with the technical committee. The technical committee consists of representatives of the public lands team and city staff who are directly involved with the implementation and management of the trail system and the Foothills natural areas at large. This group received technical training from subcontractors, primarily Scott and Jeremy, and public lands staff spent 2 weeks in the field on field review. After that, in the fall of 2022, SE Group moved to an internal stakeholder group consisting of representatives of various city departments who may be a stakeholder in the plan, but are not directly involved in implementation and management. Groups like city departments like public utilities, which is a primary property owner, public safety, fire, police, 911. We have Captain Scott Winkler from the fire department, who was one of our independent stakeholder members, the transportation department, sustainability department, et cetera. Their role was to help define expectations and other city department needs and learn about their roles and experiences with the Foothills natural area. They also, SE Group also held significant community stakeholder groups, community stakeholder meetings. They hosted about 10 intake sessions with community stakeholders. This included community councils, accessibility advocacy groups, environmental advocacy groups, and trail user advocacy groups. All of our landowners, including public utilities, the University of Utah, Utah State Parks, and the U.S. Forest Service, tribal community groups, as well as underrepresented groups. The key trends from all these stakeholder meetings were documented and integrated as recommendations when appropriate in the plan. If you grab this paper near the sign-in sheet, this is the defining sustainable trail slide. That there's 2 slides that we put up because it's so dense. We wanted to make sure you had this information to take home with you. When starting the process, it was a priority of SE Group to help give a working definition of what it means to have sustainable trails. They're not just evaluating the trails, but they're actually evaluating the natural area as a whole. But when we talked about defining sustainable trails, I wanted to make sure they had a common definition. So this graphic and slide was produced at that time, focusing on clarifying ecological sustainability, physical sustainability, social sustainability, and maintenance and stewardship. So because it's so dense, it's important for you to have that. So if you want to reflect on it, you can. For those of you online, I'll be sending this as a follow-up with the recording as a PDF of this slide as well. All right, so now that is all the information that we had previously shared in June, and now we here are with the report on the evaluation. As I mentioned before, I want to remind that this is SE Group's evaluation, the implementation, not public land, so I'll more or less be reading the slides. The plan evaluation as a whole, the 2020 Foothills Trail System Plan, had these listed as strengths. The plan included a significant amount of input from stakeholders and the public. The plan identifies the desire and the need for an expanded managed trail system to increase accessibility, safety, and enjoyment for users and protection of the environment. Accessibility, safety, and enjoyment were 3 of the 5 of the plan's goals. And the third strength was the plan identified the diversity of potential users for the foothills and their needs as well. Areas of improvement, as pointed out by the evaluators, was the plan does not clarify and elaborate on the environmental damage caused by the many existing unplanned trails that exist in the foothills. The plan needs more specific implementation procedures. It needs more extensive trail alignment planning to match the desired user experiences. And the plan needs more specific implementation strategies for managing natural and cultural resources. So those were the main hits for the evaluation of the plan itself. And just for the timeline, how it goes, I'm going to share these evaluation points for the plan, then with the phase 1, and then it's going to go into recommendations. And a lot of the recommendations are obviously directly related to their evaluation. So we'll be going deeper when we talk about the specific recommendations. All right, for the implementation of phase 1, which was June 2020 through May of 2021, the strengths that were identified by the SE Group and their consultants Phase 1 provided new trail corridors and enhanced access of new and existing users to access desired foothills destinations. Also, the Phase 1's trail design and construction created user-specific trails, meaning separate alignments for different types of use like downhill bikers and hiking, which met the plan's goals for increased safety and enjoyment, which were best practices. Phase 1 also closed eroding trail segments and replaced them with sustainably constructed alignments at times. So, Phase 1 implementation evaluation areas for improvement. Trail development occurred in some areas constrained by both overly steep terrain and challenging soils. They wanted to point out that trails can be built on steep or challenging soils, but not both. This can be resolved by more improved design and planning in advance and specific construction guidelines. A second area for improvement was construction quality of some segments was poor due to inefficient planning and insufficient oversight. Similar to the last point, Phase 1 used a design-build approach, which means it was all happening at the same time, or one right after another, which requires a quick turnaround. This can be resolved by splitting up the design process, which includes equipment specifications, from the implementation process. The third area for improvement was some trail segments were developed without a well-defined purpose, or the purpose was changed. This occurred when trail use restrictions changed due to insufficient advanced planning. This also could be resolved when discussing the upcoming recommendations. All right, recommendations. So there are 7 major individual recommendations that can be organized into 3 main themes. These are a more thorough planning process, better communication, and planning for future maintenance and management. Those are the 3 things. You can see the 7 bullets here, but there's 7 slides to go through each one. So I'm just going to go ahead to the next one. The SE Group report describes each recommendation thoroughly in the report. So there's three planning recommendations. The first is this concept of conducting restoration and recreation planning by zones. And we're calling that for this presentation and potentially in the future, Foothills Open Space Zones, or FOSZs. It's not a Muppet. It's what we're calling it for now. And I don't believe there's any Fozzie bears living in the foothills yet. But so these are different. These zones have natural land features as their boundaries, like ridges or creeks, and would be planned like a park. Examples might be in purple, the Mount Van Cott and University Fozzie would be Red Butte Canyon to Dry Creek. Or another example might be at the green at the top, Meridian Peak and Bonneville Shoreline Preserve basically goes from Davis County to the North City Creek Ridgeline. That would be an area to be focused on planning. The key takeaway from the Fozzie planning approach, this is probably a major highlight, is that it gives focus to the management of the full area, not just the trail corridors. Planning includes ecological and geographic evaluation. It includes restoration planning, preservation planning, communication and education planning, as well as trail system planning. Any trail planning would include evaluating each existing trail in an area to see which one should be integrated and maintained, which ones need restoration or realignment to be integrated, and where new trails will support the plan's goals of safe and enjoyable recreation access for a diverse group of visitors. So now that we've defined our FOSZs, how do these FOSZs actually get developed? The 2020 plan had the right goals, but just didn't have the appropriate implementation processes in place. These include a thorough planning process, which includes an iterative and cyclical project initiation and baseline area review. Once the desired plan has been determined, the design process commences to visualize the desired plan. And once the designs for restoration, conservation trails, and trail amenities have been finalized, then the implementation occurs. The FOSZI planning and implementation process are modeled after federal NEPA guidelines. The third planning major recommendation is actually a part of the trail planning philosophy or strategy, which is the prioritization of maintenance enhancement of existing trails and trailheads. In the report, this is says the prioritize the maintenance and enhancement of existing facilities. Facilities might confuse you, so we just substituted in trails and trailhead because that's what we're talking about. It's not, buildings out there or anything like that. Okay. So this is actually a subset of the PIP process when considering how to assess the existing trail network. Not enough detailed evaluation was given to the existing trails in the 2020 plan to determine which should be maintained, improved, or closed. The greatest concern are trails in riparian corridors due to the ecological importance, like this picture here. So their recommendation says when existing trail evaluation should consider whether the value of existing trails outweigh natural resource impacts, whether partial or full corridor relocation could or can occur outside the riparian corridor, and if existing trails are to remain in place, which they could, how might intermittent stormwater snowmelt impacts be mitigated or lessened? All right, those are the 3 planning recommendations. The next 2 are communications recommendations. Develop and implement a consistent public communication strategy was the first of the 2. And evaluate this strategy as needs change to keep the community informed and educated. Some of this has already been implemented, as I will discuss with the public lands concurrent efforts, and you'll see some examples here. Since the plan was created, Salt Lake City Public Lands has increased staff budget to include 2 full-time Foothills park rangers, 2 Foothills maintenance staff full-time that are starting this spring. And this summer, 4 seasonal positions for Foothills, including a part-time communication specialist dedicated solely to the Foothills. Also listed here, you'll see our communications channels, community council and peanut coordination, and then coordination with key stakeholder groups. Thank you. That's a good question. There's a selected advisory committee to the Public Lands Department that is called Peanut. It's not a peanut gallery. It's Parks, Natural Lands, Urban Forestry, and Trails. So that's with the PNUT. And it's a citizen advisory board to the Public Lands Department. Thank you.
It's a volunteer.
It's a volunteer group. Yes, they are definitely not paid, except with dinner once a month. Dinner, that's it. But it's definitely a volunteer group. The second communications recommendation is developing a unified wayfinding system. In 2015, the then Department of Parks and Public Lands had a parks, open space, and trails signage guidelines package completed. This predated any work formalizing anything in the Foothills, so we did not include anything for the Foothills except noting that there were some totems out there noting the Bonneville Shoreline Trail. And I think there's about 6 signs on public utilities gates that say this is the Foothills. So for a more robust Foothills natural area management, you need a lot more communication through signage. So their recommendation was to extend this dramatically through wayfinding, education, restoration signage, responsible use and behavior signage, safety and emergency preparedness, and accessibility inclusivity. The third category, of recommendations from SE Group was future maintenance and management. And there was 2 major recommendations here. One is to increase data, increase data use to inform decision-making for management and maintenance. Trail counters, we have Salt Lake City had them. We have 9 trail counters out in the Foothills, but the recommendation is more trail counters should be implemented to show who is already using the system. This should be complemented with manual counts and community surveys to increase the understanding of this data and who's using it, not just bodies passing through an infrared light. Leveraging big data, that means trail use apps like Strava and All Trails and Trailforks and all that stuff so that we can get a better breadth of understanding of who might be using the Foothills. And then partnering with different universities and their student groups to maybe increase the reach through volunteer tabling events and data collection and analysis. The second important recommendation from SE Group and Scott and Jeremy, we're on slide 19, recommendation is ultimately to develop management plans for the Foothills natural area. Given that there are multiple agencies with ownership or management of lands in the Foothills, the goals will be to create a multi-agency agreement for management of the area which will include, and remember, this is the U.S. Forest Service, University of Utah, Salt Lake City Public Utilities, Utah State Parks, and Salt Lake City Public Lands, to define each entity's role, establish conservation and preservation goals for the whole Foothills natural area, not just their falsies, refining environmental strategies, and then connecting the 2020 Foothills Trails Plan, FOSI plans that have been developed, and other recommendations to the overall management strategies as a whole. All right, so those were the 7 recommendations. Next steps. Now talking a little bit of that, my public hands, my city employee hat back on, I can tell you a little bit more of what we've been doing in the last 2 years. Public lands team has been very busy. New programs have launched, including the new ranger and maintenance teams, as I mentioned, plus the Be Wild campaign. Public lands is launching a new department-wide program to educate the community on how we can enjoy and care for the collective public spaces together while limiting our impact. WILD is an acronym. I have little cards if you want more information on it. We are welcoming people to our public lands, reminding them they are inclusive spaces, asking them to limit their impact and to do what they can. So we can get more on that as well. Additionally, we've had significant trail and trailhead improvements, including this spring or this year, 5 major trailheads having renovations for the spring, and 18th Avenue will be this fall. Updated signage and added care stations at most residential minor trailheads are in development. BST maintenance to repair trail tread has occurred to trail tread and erosion concerns in West City Creek, as well as day-to-day or season-to-season trail corridor clearing and tread repair. What are the next steps? The evaluation report has been submitted. We've been meeting with groups. We're having our presentations. We had our peanut board. We learned what peanut stood for on February 1st. We've already met with one targeted stakeholder group and who's been an active participant in this process. We're meeting with another one in the next week or two. We have our meeting today. Next, we'll be briefing the mayor's administration on the evaluation and recommendations. We will then similarly send a transmittal to City Council to set up a date to a presentation in March. And what do public lands do as a result of this recommendation and working with the community, working with the mayor's office, working with the city council? We will adjust our processes as directed by the mayor and city council. We will request a revised scope of work from city council for remaining implementation funding. We will begin our joint MOU or memorandum of understanding discussion with the other landowner groups. We will establish a community working group that will help us make big decisions, not just around trail alignments, but actually how to manage restoration, how to manage dogs, how to manage e-bikes, all the issues that occur now and future ones that we don't know about yet. And so it'll be a community working group working together, and then begin process to develop our first FOSI plan so we can implement a more balanced restoration and recreation environment in foothills. All right. Questions?
Yeah, Tyler, Kenton Peters here. Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Tyler, can I ask a question?
Dan, you were first. You raised your hand.
I think this is addressed to both Scott and public lands, but so in the report, there's a discussion of open space in mountain parts of Boulder, Colorado. For conservation is driven in part by, and I'm going to quote here, a desire to protect a visual backdrop of undeveloped land to the west of the city. Boulder's on the east side of the mountains, so west of the city. Given the fact that the recently built trails in Salt Lake City foothills can be seen from as far away as this building, from a I can see that here.
Raise my hand.
Aren't you concerned about the impact of constructing switchback and mid-mountain trails on the visual backdrop of Salt Lake City? Could people online hear me?
Did you hear that, Scott? Jeremy? Yes. Would you like to respond?
Yeah, I think, I live in Boulder, Colorado, and
No, he's unmuted. Hang
it's an out.
on. We can't hear you, Scott. Hang on. Yeah. Actually, let's just stop sharing. Leah, do you know how to give permission to let them speak?
I was found somebody else that
Were we getting audio from that earlier?
Yes, we were. Scott, can you try talking again?
Sure. Can you hear us now?
is your computer?
Are folks on line able to hear us?
Yes.
Line able to hear us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Tyler, I think it's on your end that folks can't hear. But as Tyler gets that figured out, I will speak over him. I'm a resident of Boulder, Colorado.
It's the big machine in the room that's muted. So give us 1 second. And Kenton, I see you. We'll have you go right after these guys respond.
Thanks. We are.
And then, I can respond here.
We're getting you.
Or something. How about now?
Can you hear us?
Yes. Thank you. You're on, Scott.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
We win. We pulled out a number of different kind of corollary open space, trail, and natural resource management departments that have similarities to Salt Lake City public lands in the report, so that each of them, I think, have different aspects that are pertinent to ongoing and forward-thinking management here. I'm a resident of Boulder, Colorado, and there was a very early adopter of an open space and mountain parks type of program in Boulder almost 40 years ago. And it's an outlier in the development of open space and mountain parks programs, in that one of their mission goals was to protect the visual backdrop of Boulder, which is very similar to what it's like in Salt Lake City. Most mission statements revolve more around public access, natural resource management. Certainly, from that time of that founding of that program forward, more folks in more places in open space departments have looked at the idea of visual resource management. Certainly the Forest Service does, and all the public agencies when making decisions about projects. And that would be one aspect to look at in the development of these FOSI plans overall, is that there is a visual backdrop, and what is positive in that backdrop and what is negative. And there's certainly things that you can and can't control there. There's a current Rocky Mountain Power pole replacement project going on. Can't hide those poles. Can we hide trails? We can probably hide trails better than some of the things that were done in the phase one of trail construction implementation. And that would be a goal looking, into future phases in places that do have high potential visual impacts. How can we mitigate or minimize those impacts so that we aren't having something that may or may not look like a scar to some people, or to some other people it looks like a great experience. But to give the impression that this is a contiguous landscape, is certainly a very important, from a city kind of feel about, their backdrop and what is out there and what they're protecting.
Okay, we've got Kenton had his hand up, he's online, and then there's a comment in the chat, but it was out loud.
Kenton, your turn. You can unmute.
All right, there we go. Unmuted. Thanks for all your work, people. But that's a lot of broad background and process. Let's cut to the chase here. Are any new trails going to be built in 2024?
That is up to city council and the mayor's office. And as I said, the plan would be to put these recommendations, get it approved through city council, and then with the FOSI, and whether that's the fall of 2024 or if it's the spring of 25, we don't know what that is yet. But the next step is to see what city council will allow public lands to do.
So, do you have a specific trail in mind for them to approve?
So no, because if the FOSI doesn't talk about specific trails, the FOSI will plan an area and then will build a group of trails or whatever else is going to happen in that area.
Great. So basically, we're at least a year out, if not more, right? How long is this FOSI process going to take, and where are you going to start?
We're just sharing the evaluation report. We don't have the point of this evaluation was not to tell us which trails to build next. It was to give us an evaluation of what we've done so far and how to move forward. And that's what we're doing. We could have trails this fall. We could have them next spring. We don't know. We don't know what it specifically is going. We have ideas, but we need to go through the process just like we would have in the 2020 plan. That was the process to have restoration plans approved and alignments approved for building.
Which FOSI sections are priority? What FOSI is going to be studied first?
So SE Group recommended that we start with the Meridian Peak Shoreline Preserve first. Scott and Jeremy can speak to that. One thing that internally we've talked about is making sure that we go back to phase 1 area of the East City Creek, Upper Avenues area, and make sure we finish what we needed. We should have finished in phase 1, which could include potential different trails or a better connection trails or managing the social trails that are in that space as well.
Yeah, and if you went there, would that include the Twin Peaks connection that is only partially done?
That is up for discussion. That would have to be analyzed, but we would have to know that we're getting sign off from the city council and we have clear direction of which to go with that.
Right. Likewise for Dry Creek, which is even a harder nut to crack.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Tyler.
Yeah, Dry Creek was postponed prior to the pause by the city due to the challenges that terrain presented itself in finding alignment that made sense for what we were doing. So it was one of those things that we were glad we were patient because of the complications that corridor contains.
Great. So you said Scott can comment on the FOSI priorities?
Scott and Jerry, they're together.
Thank you, Tyler.
Hey, Alec had a question.
Yeah.
Hang on a second. I think Scott and Jeremy are going to talk first.
Respond.
Yeah, I think one of the things that kind of got lost in a lot of the details of the original 2020 plan is that, with all of the Forest Service land that's up and down the backdrop of the city, developing trails, doing restoration, any other activities on that land, of which quite a bit of the Meridian Peak and Shoreline Preserve is on U.S. Forest Service land, is going to require going through their NEPA process. And that seems to be, I don't know if it got wiped under the table, but it's something, if you look at those planning documents and the maps that were there, there's large swaths that are crosshatched that say future or additional habitat study area needed. Most of those crosshatched areas are on U.S. Forest Service land where they have to go through this NEPA process of natural resource and cultural evaluation. So, working on the first FOSI in the Meridian Peak and Shoreline Preserve area really provides the opportunity to start to kick off that type of planning and collaborative process with the Forest Service. in an area that doesn't have a lot of trails. And, which that kind of collaborative process is going to be a big part of the backbone of the rest of this planning.
Anything else? Okay. Alec in the chat had said, I'm just a person who lives downtown. I just wanted to chime in that I really appreciate the work that's been done by Salt Lake City Public Lands. I grew up in Boise, and the trail management there was phenomenal. Hoping SLC can get there soon someday. Understand hands are tied until approvals have come through, but any idea when Peak Storm Break Creek will be open? So I'm reading that one maybe more in light of the trail management aspect, and whether Scott and Jeremy or you can respond to that.
For what's occurring in Boise, or
maybe what the recommendations are for future trail management.
did you guys hear that?
Probably not.
Yeah, no, he didn't.
Can you hear me?
No, we heard it. Thanks, Leah. I think I would say the biggest thing that we can say to the public in Salt Lake City, from our experience working with dozens and dozens of similar entities, is that trails aren't managed by a public land manager. They're managed by the people that use those trails. And the lack of management in the foothills for a very long time has led to situations that are somewhat challenging. Knowing that public lands has relatively very small staff, the maintenance of these trails in the future, the restoration of unplanned trail impacts that are out there, these are going to be borne on the backs of people who love those trails. And that type of land stewardship and volunteerism is really what makes for successful trail systems. Foothills Trail summer staff are not going to be able to do the lion's share of trail maintenance in, species restoration, non-native species, mitigation and management. These are things that people that care about the trails and care about the lands that are there have to be not just partners, but probably the main weight lifters in that process. Public land can be a manager, an organizer, a stewardship coordinator. But every place that we've seen that has very successful trail systems, those are built on the backs of hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers.
Drew has had his hand up for a long time, and then we can go to Christina.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Just wanted to put a plug in for the mountain bike teams in the area and the Utah League. I was the previous head coach of the West High School mountain bike team, and they're part of the National Interscholastic Cycling Association, which is the national organization over the various leagues within the United States. In Utah, we have our own league, and it started about 12 years ago and started from basically nothing, from scratch. And now we have 7,000 athletes in the league across Utah. Within the Salt Lake area, we have each of the high schools are represented in the program, and we have 200 to 300 athletes, and that's a growing number of individuals who are participating in that. So in addition to myself, there are several other people who are attending this meeting who are part of that and can kind of endorse that program. So we're out on the trails a lot. We use the trails very frequently in the area. And we're very appreciative of the new trails that have been built, and in particular, the dedicated areas where there are downhills to safely descend in the area. I would just say that the process that commenced, my understanding, was 2016 for the recent planning, and the execution of that plan, or as you say, implementation, started in 2020. And then it was abruptly stopped. It was my understanding there were several, depending on where you start counting, there were several decades of planning that actually pre-existed prior to the 2016 plan. So there was a lot of planning that went in before the implementation. We did get some of those trails in. We have a growing number of individuals who have diverse needs who would like to use the trail system and use it safely. The safety aspects have been improved, and I think that the environmental aspects have been improved as well over the older trail systems. But there's still a lot of work to be done, for individuals to enjoy that area and enjoy it safely. So kind of building on Kenton's, urging to get back to work. I think we've been patient in this and would like to see the work commence as quickly as possible to create an environmentally safe program, but also a program that's protective of the individuals who are participating in those various sports.
Thank you, Drew. Who's next, Christina?
So I represent one of the city's community councils, and I'm also from Boise. So the Register River program is like a really prominent nonprofit that speaks to these, hundreds to thousands of volunteers. So one thing that I felt in this process is that there's all these groups that participated and all these stakeholders and lots of nonprofits and lots of charities, and they're all sort of working on the same things, but not necessarily all working together. And in the beginning, we kind of felt like there was actually competition between the groups as to who had the say in it. And as a recognized community organization, we work with a geographically recognized area, whoever happens to live there. So I'd like to know a little bit more about, there's these nods to community council coordination and future stakeholder from this, from the public. And we kind of like to understand what those groups are. Are they going to continue to sort of be dispersed stakeholders that, work together and are chosen to work together? Or if the community is going to continue to be able to weigh in? And then the second thing I wanted to ask about, which goes along with it, so actually the same question asked a different way, are, what are we doing at this stage to sort of get folks from their silos into a collaborative effort to work together beyond what amazing work you guys are doing here? I'm talking more about the general public and the stakeholders. Sure.
I'll respond. Tyler Rock with Public Lands. I think that's a wonderful question, and I think really gets at the heart of the community advisory groups that Tyler was talking about. And I think there are a lot of details with the community advisory groups that we don't yet. And following our briefing of City Council and approval to move forward, I think our number one priority is establishing that community group. Leah has provided a framework for what establishing that group may look like. And I just wanted to say that we don't have all those details worked out, but there will be a lot of opportunity. I think there's a lot of similar models happening right now in the state, where Moab has created a very similar community trails advisory group that is making recommendations to both the Forest Service and the BLM on new trails, on e-bikes, and all of those things. So I think there's a lot of models to look at. But I would love for Leah to weigh in on kind of what those recommendations look like in the plan.
Yeah, so in the FOS plan, what we've recommended is, I think one of the critical pieces of the requests that came out of the evaluation were to look more closely at context as opposed to the foothills broadly. And so the public engagement approach that is tied to the FOS plans is also fairly context specific. But the idea would be a group of representatives from various interests, including different types of users, maybe types of visitors that we wouldn't normally see, or who are underrepresented through, whether that's through access or language barriers or whatever. the property owners or land managers, which is a really big component here. There's a large collaborative process that's going to need to happen. The impacted community councils, perhaps the city council representative or their staff, depending on where we are in the area. So that public engagement process is much more tied to the specific location. But Public Lands is also working through Be Wild, which is the stewardship program, and it has been expanding their public and communications team pretty regularly. So also leveraging the newsletters, the website, community councils to share more broadly with the public what is happening in the Foothills, what those opportunities are, both for stewardship and otherwise. And then one of the recommendations is tied to data. I'm working with universities, but I also think that's another opportunity to do more engagement, to leverage people who are able to go out and about and talk to people to get that information and get input back. Tyler also had, I want to talk about your silo question, but one other thing that we were doing was some QR code signage check-ins at trailheads. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think the data piece that we're talking about is indicative. We don't necessarily have a great picture of who is using the trails, right? Yeah. And that's a piece that is a recommendation that expands, and that takes time. Over time, as we start to get that data, then we can look at who's not represented and do better to engage those folks. But do you want to talk about that?
It's a multi-tiered problem or challenge that we're trying to address. There is, I mentioned, 9 totems with QR code. 9 posts with infrared trail counters, and we have data from the last 6 years, which shows the use that has been. If we can increase that. We also want to pilot this QR code, which I know it's a little counterintuitive sometimes to pull out your smartphone when you're going to go hiking, but a lot of people have them in their pockets. A lot of people are happy to use them if they know that if I check in, this data is going to be helpful to know, not just not just that something past it, but having an opt-in option to tell if you're hiking or biking or with the dog or things like that. And the other one that I think, if I recall correctly, that's also in the report is where the data, no matter how many trail counters we have, is how we can't count the people who aren't there because of the obstacles to entry, which could be because they don't know where the trailheads are. They don't know that there are safe trails. The trails are too challenging in front of the trailhead. There's a lot of things that we've learned from Scott and Jeremy, who've seen these dozens of trail systems around the country, particularly in an urban area, where we have a pretty broad diversity responsibility of all of our residents in our city and visitors, not just the avid trail runners and mountain bikers, but to everyone, so that there are things to do and so that we can count them. Right now, we're not just doing the trail counter data, but following data, visitation of Salt Lake City, who's moving to Salt Lake City, what are those demographics, what are their needs, whether it's language or fitness or culture or experience, all of these factors are really important, which candidly is different than Moab. It's different than Park City. It's different than Draper. We are a much different city with which we have a different responsibility. So those are the ones that need to count, because they're likely not going to pass a trail counter if they don't know how to get there. They don't feel confident in getting there.
So to the siloing, I think, and the competition, I think you're right. I think the competition is the crux of the issue, right? We have a lot of diverse needs, and a lot of people feel varying levels of ownership to the wilderness, to their trail, to the experience that they have in the foothills. And that's the joy of working with the public and the joy of being a land manager or any public service, really, is that there are always competing interests. I think the best we can do is share transparently the lessons that are learned here and begin to try to build trust and repair some of the damage that was caused, and continue to be transparent as there are opportunities during cause planning and there are opportunities for stewardship, right? The piece I think that I'm always in awe of when I'm working with public lands is that it's such a new entity, and I know, because it doesn't feel like it, but really it's a pretty new entity, and there's so much to manage. So there's some patience that's required too.
I'd also add to the silo question, I think it's important to piggyback off what Leah's saying. There is a very high probability that everyone in this room and everyone online is passionate about very similar things, even though it might appear to be different. We want to be appreciative and enjoy this amazing space. And what we try with Scott and Jeremy and the ESSA group, and we've been trying to make sure we can articulate well, is that a well-managed, well-planned natural area has a trail system in it to protect the environment. I think, Tyler, you said it so nicely this morning. It's like trails are the way we interact with nature. We're out there in these spaces, and we dedicate these lanes so that we can protect the rest. And so this community working group, the goal is not to bring in competing interests, but the goal of the community working group is to actually bring people together to work towards a common goal of a managed natural area that offers protection of certain areas and sustainable recreation to enjoy the area, because there are still some barriers for people to do that. And so how that's going to work is we're going to build this committee out, create some guidelines, get some participation. There was a question I think David asked, and you can ask it, but there was like, how's those decisions, who's going to get to weigh in when? We don't know yet, but it's not going to be something we decide in 3 years. We're going to be deciding that this year, so that we can use these things going forward and hopefully come into this forum to understanding a mutually beneficial outcome that we might not, everybody gets what they want, but we understand that we're working towards a common goal. And that group has to be participating in that group. You have to understand that's what we're working towards.
And just that was excellent. All of you answered that so greatly. So, I guess the question is that, do you foresee the expansion of the city really being the premier, again,
stakeholder,
not stakeholder, but the Register Rivers type organization? Or do you see the development, as your consultants were talking about, of some strong, really powerful, unionizing nonprofit?
Great question. So I took a field trip to Boise. We talked to them up there. Rich Rivers and Dave Gordon, who's their program manager, I've been there, I've studied their stuff. It's a great model, but they're Boise and we're Salt Lake City. Our Foothills are like this, their Foothills are like this. It's just, you can't. And they go tens of miles deep. Sorry, I might have exaggerated this way. We're like a mile deep and straight up, But where we have in common is Ridge Rivers is not a nonprofit. It's actually a quasi-governmental collaborative between Ada County, City of Boise, BLM, Idaho Fish and Game, and U.S. Forest Service. We actually have 5 similar types of things where City of Boise is the managing partner in that relationship. If you want to go to richrivers.org and look at their 8-page MOU, you'll see who is in charge of what. And you could see that in ours. I'm like, we're going to get this together and define who does what. Guess what? City of Boise does 90% of it. And that's just the way, and we'll do 90% of it here. Except for, the major wild card here, not to point fingers, but the University of Utah is their own entity. And that's not and they're there with they have a great interest in managing their property, where the U.S. Forest Service is thankful that someone else has stepped to the table to help do that. And the public utilities is an internal city department. We just start getting along, working on our own group. So that would be the goal, is to have a Ridge Rivers type of partnership. And then have whether it's an advocacy group or a .org or a nonprofit partner doing, whether it's fundraising or volunteer coordination, getting the high school and middle school mountain biking teams as one of our main partners to do stewardship on trail and ecological maintenance, all those things, so that we can have a stronger community together versus the concern of the siloed, butting heads.
Awesome.
Okay, I'm just gonna say it's 6:30. We have still 5 or 6 comments online, so I just want to make you aware of time. And
yeah, I was going to suggest maybe 5 more minutes, because it took us 5 minutes to start the Zoom.
I would say maybe 5 or 15 over.
Perfect. So, and just as a reminder, and you may have remembered from seeing the slides, this is not the final opportunity to talk collaboratively or separately. we've been doing a lot of listening, and learned an enormous amount from it. We've already met with one stakeholder group, and guess what? We're going to meet with them more. So Trails Alliance, mountain biking teams, we will continue to work with the goal of coming together for conversations versus siloed conversations. But it's important that the forum to communicate is open and not cut off at 6:45 and move on. So go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, this is essentially, we wanted you all to know before we go to council, right? I think nothing is worse than getting like the email that comes back from council that says this was a presentation that occurred, right? I don't think that's useful community engagement. So I think that's why we wanted to make sure that people who've expressed direct interest throughout the process have the opportunity to hear it. This is not an easy document, right? This is a technical. I've been through the whole process, and I have to keep asking questions so that I can understand it, so that we can talk about it. So it's not easy. Okay, David has asked maybe a three-part question. How much money has been allocated or budgeted by Salt Lake City for planning and design, one, and two, construction of trails? I know that's a little tricky. I don't know if we have direct numbers.
Yeah, I don't. I'll respond to that. I don't have direct numbers. I know about what we have remaining that was allocated for new trail construction. The city in 2020 allocated, I want to say, just around $400,000 for trail construction, and that funding was matched by the state. And so I would say the total budget was close to around $800,000 for implementation of phase one of the master plan. We probably spent somewhere in the realm of $200,000 to $300,000 in initial implementation. We've been spending funding on this planning and evaluation process, and we have around $300,000 that is remaining in a combination of both grants and city funds that can be used for implementation. So,
If council
approved, I think the key thing I want to specify there is those funds are currently intended for implementation of the trails plan, which is primarily trail construction. That is not our intent to use the remaining funds all for trail construction. So when we go to council, we plan on requesting funding for a variety of items, all related to the FOSI planning, for trailhead improvements, for wayfinding improvements, for trail restoration, for vegetation management. So it will go into a broader area than just trail construction, if approved.
I think we talked about how public input and comment will occur as planning continues. So again, that's through that committee, and then there will also be information provided to the public more broadly. Kenton asked when we'll be presenting to City Council. The answer is we don't have a confirmed date yet. They're the leisure of their agenda, which is pretty tight. So hopefully this spring.
Yeah, we plan to submit our transmittal to City Council next Monday or Tuesday. I think the earliest we would probably be on is mid-March.
David's last question was, aren't there some short-term improvements that can be implemented quickly with minimal expense, such as basic signage, portable outhouses at trailheads? Why can't these simple, easy things be done now or this summer?
They can, and they will be this spring. We have made, David, question. We actually have, as I mentioned, 4 new major trailheads being rebuilt or constructed this spring. Popperton Park, Bonneville Boulevard, Victory Road, and Immigration Canyon, as well as 18th Avenue Trailhead will be redone in conjunction. It was moved to the fall in conjunction to Public Utilities is rebuilding their pump house there, as well as signage at all these residential trailheads has been designed and is now in the implementation process to put together the unique site plans that will improve these accesses, which will include trash cans, welcome signs with kiosks, as well as dog waste dispensers.
Not dog waste dispenser.
Yeah, not dog waste. Thank you. We're hoping the dog waste gets into the bag and then actually gets picked up at the time of incident. That'll be another thing. And then to actually not on the way back to the trailhead, but at the time of pickup, and then into the can. And then there will be a strong presence. So that money has been spent. It will continue to be spent, as well as the trail maintenance. In this May of 2023, we updated the tread and trail corridor to 1 mile of BST along West City Creek. And then in November, we took that greatly eroding water chute at the base of it, installed rock steps, and we'll be widening the alternate access for bicycles or adaptive use. So there is, and we're planning that this year as well. There'll be extensive improvements to trails, probably with priority being the Bonneville Shoreline Trail and trails connected to the new trailhead improvements.
So it's that major changes are pending the larger planning process.
Yeah, major changes. I mean, a lot of improvements that go along to the trail amenities that need to occur are happening now. We've been spending the money, we've been spending the time and all that stuff. It's just that the only thing that was paused was new construction of new trails. So we've been analyzing, doing a lot of planning and coordinating potential for new efforts to improve what we have now until we have the process finished so that we can plan and move forward with the POSI plans.
Drew asked a question, and
I responded to some in the chat.
Yeah, so this one is, I think it would be helpful to understand all of the various constituents and their position. Is there a way to have another meeting where folks can fill out surveys in the meeting so you can identify areas of consensus right away? And to that, I would say that there was a very extensive public engagement process as part of the original trails plan. And it's my understanding that SE Group also felt like that the diverse needs and the diverse interests are reflected in that document and that they inform the goals. I don't know about future areas for consensus, and maybe that is something that we look at once we start POS planning and those kinds of things, but I don't know if you want to add anything there.
Yeah, I would just add that I think there is an opportunity within the small area planning that we're going to still have a very diverse group of people and stakeholder interest in that planning process. And I think, at least in this very conceptual idea, is that we're utilizing that group to help us identify what are the goals identified in the original master plan, but also what are the stakeholder goals that exist within the community advisory group, and the creation of kind of what that small area plan will look like. So I think that's a great place. I mean, that maybe we can identify key stakeholder goals within those small area plans.
Yeah.
Wondered, in talking about trail amenities, whether benches at critical junctions will be part of
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
planning for all.
Yeah. So that's part of the planning is that. So for example, again, this is
A lot of holes up there.
there's a lot of. That's my guy. But for an example, I went for a hike with some folks up to the living room to see what's going on over there, and there was this just maybe a half a mile up. You didn't make it to the living room trail, but for some folks, that's all they want to go to. If there's a bench to rest and celebrate that they've made it up there, and then go back down, that's a perfect opportunity. So that gets into the whole POSI planning. It's not just about trails; it's about the whole trail experience. And that sometimes the corner of a switchback is a perfect place because there's a landing. I've made it, and I don't want to go up to the peak because I don't have enough time, or I'm recovering from an injury, or I'm just not that fit anymore, or I'm trying to get that, whatever it is. So yes, benches, other amenities like that are definitely in the park, and also some fencing and that will be installed, that should be installed to protect some restoration. That might be a semi-permanent areas where you'll see some areas that will protect certain areas. That's in context with the benches and stuff like that. Yeah. Gwen.
Regarding getting more public input, I was on the Peanut board when we did the original planning, and we worked very hard on it and involved all along. And I felt that we had done an amazing job. And then we got all this feedback that maybe we hadn't reached the right people, or maybe there were people or something. I feel like the more that we can do in the next, moving forward from here, to make sure that people feel like they've been heard, so that I don't have to go through that again.
But it's a great point, and I want Scott and Jeremy to correct me if I passed your test, if did I learn what I was supposed to from your master class for the last 2 years. Is the goals of the plan were really solid for it's not any plan. It's for Salt Lake City. We are a very unique urban open space interface. And so having a more diverse community and having those goals, those were really good. They said in the plan and the report, et cetera, that we did a lot of listening. You can always get more opinions. People will always want to communicate. And we want to make sure, and I'm going to be a little silly here, but it's like you've heard of the term, the communication or the communication period. Well, let's make that a comma, because it's going to go on. But you have to start making some decisions so the period doesn't end. You don't stop listening because the report is done, but you need to learn to adapt and move them. But you also need to know that we need to start implementing some things. And there's going to be some new, and not everyone's going to be heard. Everyone will be listened to, but not everyone will get what they want. But that's part of, as Leah said, the beauty of working in public service. Is you get to do that listening and move forward. So there's a lot of things missing from the plan, but the foundation was there. The processes were not there. The alignments were very confusing, because those were one of the biggest challenges of the 2020 plan was there's this trail map. It was a conceptual idea, and there's a lot of people thought that was a blueprint, and it wasn't. And it wasn't communicated as well as it could have been, because and that's where the FOSSIs will take it from there, to take some of those original goals that are still really good. Let's get a trail from here to there. But it may not look anything like what was in the 2020 plan, which took years of planning and will continue to take more. So we had another question. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so I have lots of questions, but just because I know we're running out of time, one of the goals that was in the evaluation was to create sustainable trails with an emphasis on the environmental sustainability. But then it said one of the things that was left out of the plan was social trails and mitigating the damage from social trails. Mm-hmm. As Salt Lake City grows and as new users to the trail system come to experience the trail system, that seems, in my understanding, like it would need to be a huge priority in terms of mitigating erosion. When will that become a priority? What does that mitigation strategy look like? And how is that process moving forward?
Great question. So that goes to the FOSSI planning. Like in phase one, when new trails were put in, the dozens of user-created trails in that area were either ignored and hoped would go away, or would actively close in an improper methodology, and really poorly communicated. So we kind of struck out in 3 different ways. So the zonal approach really allows us to say, when we go plan, we as a community say, this is where the trails will go. This is what we're going to do. That trail is probably steeper than we would build, but it's already there, and it's going to be less, and it's less disturbing to move it, even though it's not ideally. But then this one over here, and this one over here, and this one over here, that takes us all to the same place. We will try to actively close with communication, fencing, active restoration. Lake is our full-time restoration ecologist, and we've been working on talking about different ways that will successfully try to do active restoration. We have our new full-time Foothills restoration maintenance person to work on our Foothills team. So those are the methods that we would do. And Scott said it really nicely. It's going to be on the back of the user. It's not public lands that it's going to stop the user trails, or it's not even stopping them. It's like communicating what is the desired approach and asking people. And that's what she's gone. That's what Boise does really well in certain areas, where they've actually had to channel people in high dense areas so that the areas have a fighting chance to recover. Because it's an urban area, it's not out in BLM country. So CJ's had his hand up forever. We're not ignoring the CJ. Last one, bud.
Yeah, so mine's kind of a 2-part question, Tyler. One, I was disappointed because it seems the inventory of trails is way different than what's actually on the ground. And like the definition of like existing social trails is very, very flexible and subjective, especially because the creation of those trails was created over 100 years by quarrymen, by horseback riders, by the military, by mountain bikers, by hikers, and 4-wheel drive recreationalists. Like, it seems to me like the city's methodology for the trails is either dishonest or just complete or just totally incomplete. And so I would love you to address that issue. The second question I have is,
you start with one, CJ.
yeah, well, the other one is actually pretty short, but if you want, I could split it up into two.
Well, you can finish the second, and maybe it's maybe we can
Because they're kind of related. Because the problem is like the city justifies building trails by saying like, we need this many miles per population density, which seems like there's a never-ending need for more trails in a very small area, which severely impacts, elk herds, deer herds. All sorts of environmental concerns are raised with that kind of thought process or that direction of logic. And so when it comes to like trail density within such a small area, right now we go up there and you can look out over the foothills and you can see undisturbed land. You can get peace of mind. It is the experience of the foothills. And with the current methodology, it seems like you could just go on a never ending push for more and more trails because, the population is getting more dense. And so what I was hoping to see from the SC group recommendation was like, here's our plan for conservation. Sure, we're going to build more trails, but like this area is going to be set aside as essentially Salt Lake City wilderness. So my question is, with all the discussion about stewardship and environmentalism, like where's the conservation plan? I'm done.
Thanks. Yeah, this is Tyler again. And I want to make it clear that that is not the scope of what the SC group was asked to do. That is not the language that was placed on public lands from City Council with regards to please identify wilderness areas in the foothills. I think it's a very valid point, and this is what I've talked to Save Our Foothills about. I think there are areas in the foothills that are probably worth designating as conservation areas. Dry Creek is one. I think public lands is not going to argue that. That is not the scope of what the SC group was ever asked to do. And so I think that's an important thing to note with regards to the scope of the evaluation.
I want you to answer the other question.
Yeah, and I agree with the first statement as well. The hard thing about the original 2020 plan is it has the impression that it's set in stone. And there were some things that the whole point of our evaluation was to get a second opinion, including the social trails or the user trails. The word, the defining of a trail can be argued. I don't like the term social trail, but the trails out there was vastly underdocumented. And that's part of this FOSI approach, is to go out into a smaller area, look at it, go back and identify, which we've already done significant mapping on GIS versus Google Earth or something like that, to make sure that the data is accurate. And so by using that, to CJ, your point, is making sure that those trails that are out there or that have been out, that have grown since the 2020, because there's probably an increase in square footage of trails by grading and widening, and more trails that happened during COVID and before COVID and after COVID, that as people come and use the foothills without a system, they're going and creating more of these trails. So that is part of that evaluation, that we were learning from what happened before, so that we can do, and like I mentioned, is that SE Group noted was the third recommendation in the planning, was evaluate existing trail facilities or trails. And that is something that is not denoted well in the 2020 plan and will be going forward. And Scott, is that an accurate representation or understanding?
Yeah, I think as you all were saying, in the FOSI zones, evaluating existing trails is a big part of that recommendation, is to look holistically at what's on the landscape, what experiences are being driven by those trails and provided by those trails, and ensuring that the planning work takes that into consideration, balancing conservation, recreation, and access in each of those.
So so essentially conservation will be looked at rather than not holistically, but like zone by zone.
Based on the specifics of each of the natural landscape in each of those zones. So it may be that a conservation area spans multiple zones, and that's identified as you start the first pause, and it is finalized as the second. The other piece of the pause planning, of course, is the sort of collaborative joint land management discussion between public lands, the U, Forest Service, and other landowners and managers, right? And so conservation may get decided at that level also.
Yeah. And this came up in the peanut board discussion because there's a little confusion on how the FOSs work. These aren't 7 silos that will be like, we will have no idea. You know, the weeds don't care when it blows over a ridge, or the elk know how to, and the flora and fauna, they move. So it's going to be connected. The Bonneville Shoreline Trail is the spine of all 7 of these FOSs. So it's not a total silo. But to Tyler Murdoch's point about Dry Creek, you know, it's a strong candidate for a conservation area. You look at a map, talked about this with folks in this meeting about that it's wedged between Red Butte Canyon and City Creek. There's a natural spot to make that. That would be looked at in that Twin Peaks Dry Creek FOSI as a prime candidate to conserve area. So that will be looked at as equally as trail planning is restoration and conservation planning. Leah, I think we ready to go home.
We got everybody's questions. I will say Christina asked a similar question about social trails, which I think you've answered, but Zancott and Mount Wire areas. I know those are the sensitive areas, so I don't know if we know when those might be addressed.
Which ones?
Those social trails.
With those Zancott and Mount Wire areas in the FOS plan.
No, I mean, we that's where that's a couple steps ahead, and it doesn't mean that we're going to do one FOS and wait a year and one FOS and wait a year. You know, we're going to wait. We're going to take these recommendations, run it through city leadership, come up with a plan, work with the community working group. You know, get people involved, keep listening, keep making decisions as a cohort, and move forward from there. Taking into consideration all these complicated factors: fire response, ecology, restoration. Scott introduced this whole process in this room 18 months ago by saying he worked with a NASA scientist who said, this isn't rocket science, this is actually much harder. And it's because in space, all you're dealing with is physics. And here we're dealing with all these layers of complex things. And it's important that we work together on that. And that's why we want these meetings to happen, to keep talking and keep listening. So thank you all for your time. Obviously, you have my email if you got here. If you have any questions, I also have cards and Be Wild stuff if you're interested. And please stay in touch, send comments, and stay involved. Because as Scott says, it's going to be on the back foot of the community to keep this a special place. So thank you. Thank you.